those whose work has brought glory to your name, making a better world for you and for me. As from your noble portals, your sons and daughters go to face a world of challenges, to conquer every foe. We'll work and play together, and as time marches on, we'll never get the lesson done. Ebola, we are one. UWI, we praise you. We lift our voice in song. We let our big drums roll loud and steel pans spin ping pong. For you have shaped our lives so that we can truly say, to you we owe our gratitude, a debt we can't repay. There is a light that is rising from north of the west, and for this a better light are we. So we follow those whose work has brought glory to your name, making a better world for you and for me. This is our university of the West Indies.
Welcome and good evening to everyone. I hope we're moving to the beat of that university song and feeling the vibrancy of our university, and particularly the UWI Mona campus. I'm Caroline Deich, and I am the coordinator of the language section of the Department of Language, Linguistics and Philosophy, which is housed in the Faculty of Humanities and Education. And this evening, it is my privilege to be the moderator of this special guest lecture by Dr. Pinite Angu of the University of Pretoria. This lecture is a signature event of the section's inaugural Language Section Week, which is taking place this week. And so far, we have been enjoying great success interacting with high school students and UWI students and high school teachers. And I'm sure that the success will continue with this lecture. I need to alert you that we are live streaming this lecture on YouTube. Without further ado then, I now invite Dr. Vivette Milson-White, Head of the Department of Language, Linguistics and Philosophy, to bring the welcome. Dr. Vivette Milson-White is a senior lecturer whose research interests are primarily in academic literacies and rhetoric. She has been serving as the head of department since August of 2021, and with great success. Over to you, Dr. Milson-White.
Thank you, Dr. Daesh. Distinguished guests, among whom is Her Excellency Mrs. Joan Thomas Edwards, High Commissioner for Jamaica to South Africa, Professor Sylvia Coenberg, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of the West Indies, the UWI Mona, other colleagues from Mona and our sister campuses, colleagues from other universities and other educational institutions in Jamaica, the wider Caribbean region and beyond, students in and from Jamaica and other countries, ladies and gentlemen all, good evening. It is my absolute delight to welcome you to this special guest lecture being hosted in this inaugural Language Week organized by the English Language Section, ELS, of the Department of Language, Linguistics and Philosophy. English Language Section members have been eager to share the work that we do in developing university students' critical language skills, eager to forge and increase linkages with high school teachers and students who are focused on preparing for tertiary level education, and eager to share international scholarship in the field of academic literacies from outside the Caribbean. The exchange of knowledge that can result from this sharing is a testament to our commitment to academic excellence and global engagement, as we demonstrate ways in which current research and developments in the broader field of writing studies influence our teaching pedagogies here at Mona. And so as I welcome all of you gathered in this virtual space, I would also like to commend the current coordinator of the English language section, Dr. Caroline Daesch, and her team for ably organizing this week of activities to facilitate learning, exchange of ideas, and networking opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, I also extend special welcome and gratitude to past heads of this department and past coordinators and members of the English language section, on whose legacy we have been able to build by digging deeper in researching, and on whose shoulders we have been able to stand to reach higher in our contribution to students' growth in their engagements with work in English, in academic and other professional settings. To give you a little background, in the Department of Language, Linguistics and Philosophy, we engage with both spoken and sign languages with the hope that our stakeholders will come to appreciate the transformative power of language in our lives. Where spoken languages are concerned, our interest is in the structure and nature of all of them. And in Jamaica, we are interested in all forms of communication used by Jamaicans. So English and Jamaican Creole, widely known as Patois, and any other form of verbal communication, as well as in Jamaican Sign Language, are of interest to us. Different areas and staff in the department have responsibility for each of these areas of interest. The English language section is responsible for helping students and other stakeholders to put English to work for various purposes within our rich Caribbean linguistic multiplex. In other words, the English language section holds the vital responsibility of facilitating guided practice and reflection, all essential for nurturing students' critical thinking abilities and for promoting communicative competence in the use of English language. Guests all, this responsibility and focus may be apparent in the name English language section. However, what we know today as the English language section started as a little unit over 60 years ago with one course called the Use of English, in which worked facilitators such as the late Richard Alsop. Later, and as the program broadened to increase another course, facilitators included Eric David King, the late Myrtle Thompson, Catherine Shields Broadber, who continues to serve the department while in retirement, and others. Today, the section offers multiple courses in academic literacies organized based on faculties, and we offer technical writing and professional communication, including public speaking. Courses which Ingrid McLaren, former ELS coordinator and head of department, was instrumental in bringing on board. And we are skilled at English language proficiency testing. The bulk of the work in the section, however, ladies and gentlemen, is offering the academic literacies courses, previously called the English Language Foundation courses, to nearly all new students who come to the UWI. In and through these general education courses, we aim to develop students who can manipulate English in any context, who can read, view, and listen to materials in English and comprehend and interpret them, and who can speak and write with confidence in English and in language suited for addressing general or specific academic audiences or the general public in any English-speaking context. In short, the facilitators in the English language section aim to develop students whose ever-increasing critical and creative thinking skills will manifest in a healthy appreciation for English within Jamaica, surrounded by Jamaican Creole, and within the rest of the Anglophone Caribbean, surrounded by our neighbors whose linguistic heritage derives from their history of colonization by other colonists than the English. Now, the nomenclature academic literacies reflects developments in the field of academic writing, suggests a connection with the teaching of academic writing in England, parts of Europe, and elsewhere, and hints at some of the politics of academic writing in higher education today. It's also where our work intersects with that of Dr. Pinete Angu, to whom I extend an extra special welcome this evening. The academic section, for which Dr. Angu is director at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, is the Unit for Academic Literacy. It's called an academic literacy, singular, not literacies unit. So a different context for sure, and likely different writing politics. But I expect that Dr. Angu will shed light on the challenges and opportunities presented by the rapidly changing landscape of education in South Africa and elsewhere when he draws on his research on student writing in higher education and academic literacy curriculum decolonization to deliver the special lecture on academic literacy teaching in an era of disruptions, thinking from the South African higher education context and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, I anticipate that we will learn much from this lecture as we find points of convergence and divergence. So welcome again, Dr. Angu. Welcome again, distinguished guests. Welcome all members of our audience. Your presence underscores the importance of the aims and mission of the English language section, and I am excited by our gathering. May the lecture and post-lecture discussion add to the intellectual stimulation in this inaugural language section week.
Thank you very much, Dr. Milson Wright. I now have the pleasure of asking our Dean, the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, who is also Professor of Linguistics, Professor Sylvia Cowenberg, to bring greetings. Professor Cowenberg is a leading Creole linguistics scholar whose work in Berbice Dutch Creole and in Papiamento has been widely acclaimed. Over to you, Dean.
Good afternoon all, and welcome to this inaugural event in the first ever English Language Week in the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. A special welcome to our guest presenter today, Dr. Pinete Angu from the University of Pretoria in South Africa. The guest lecture is on a topic which is very close to our hearts, academic literacy teaching. I think also that the guest lecture comes from a perspective which is very close to us. In societies where English is present but is not the main language for a majority of people, academic literacy teaching is doubly challenged. Academic literacy teaching is normally challenged because the academic approach to language is one that has to be learned, but in a context where English is not a first or dominant language, we find that academic literacy teaching faces additional challenges, and the literature is really only now beginning to come to grips with those kinds of contexts. The title of today's talk references an era of disruptions. When we think of disruptions, we immediately think of the recent COVID pandemic, but there are so many disruptions going on. Getting out of the classroom during the pandemic was a disruption, but getting back into the classroom after the pandemic has proven to be another one. And then the world around is throwing more disruptions into our faces from day to day. And we know that both our staff and our students are grappling with all these disruptions and with making sense of life in this disruptive context. So it is of great interest to hear about the South African higher education experience and to see how South-South exchange of experience and of lessons learned can help us move forward. So, welcome to our special guest presenter. Welcome to staff and students, and I wish you all an enjoyable event.
Thank you very much, Dean Cowenberg, for focusing us on especially for focusing us on the title of the lecture and the disruptions that we have been going through, and that you have so ably been leading us through at the Mona campus in our particular faculty. And at this time, it's really with great pleasure that I ask our Jamaica's High Commissioner to South Africa, Her Excellency Mrs. Joan Thomas Edwards, to bring greetings to us. She is particularly excited about sharing with us in this signature event. And so we welcome her and ask her to address us.
Good evening. My name is Joan Thomas Edwards, High Commissioner for Jamaica to the Republic of South Africa. It is my pleasure to join you this evening on this year inaugural Language Week. I appreciate the focus on language. Language is a very important factor in any society, and the efforts that have been made by the department to reach various spheres of society, imparting the skill of language, is a very important factor. But more so, I appreciate the fact that the University of the West Indies in Jamaica has sought to collaborate with the University of Pretoria in South Africa, bringing together the two countries. Jamaica and South Africa, we share a rich history. So language is also a very important part of our collaboration. And for that, I commend the organizers for putting together this language lecture and to invite esteemed Dr. Pinte Angu from the University of Pretoria to address the audience. This is the first step in the ladder of collaboration between Jamaica and South Africa in the area of higher education. And it's something that I would encourage all of the universities to do. Jamaica and South Africa have so much in common and so much that we can share and learn from each other. So I use this opportunity to thank the organizers for doing this, and I wish you every success in Language Week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Jamaica and South Africa, what a history we have. And South Africa is very dear to the hearts of Jamaicans. We were in the forefront of that movement against apartheid. And I think because of that, even in terms of all the African countries, there's something about South Africa, and of course, Nelson Mandela, that resonates with us. So we still have this warmth when we think of South Africa. And so we're going to ask now one of our senior instructors in the language section who teaches the academic literacy courses, Mrs. Ama Ababia, to present a short cultural item related to South Africa.
Bedspread by Lorna Goodison, celebrated Jamaican poet and former poet laureate. Sometimes in the still, unchanging afternoons, when the memories crowded, hot and hopeless against her brow, she would seek its cool colors and signal him to lie down in his cell. It is 3 in the afternoon, Nelson. Let us rest here together upon the bank, draped in freedom color. It was woven by women with slender, capable hands, accustomed to binding wounds, hands that closed the eyes of children, that fought for the right to speak in their own tongues, in their own land, in their own schools. Knotted notes of hope in each strand, and salvaged the edges with ancient blessings, older than any white man's coming. So, in the afternoons, lying on this bright bank of blessing, Nelson, my husband, I meet you in dreams. My beloved, much of the world too is asleep, blind to the tyranny and evil devouring our people. But Mandela, you are rock on this sand, harder than any metal mined in the bowels of this land. You are purer than any gold tempered by fire. Shall we lie here, wrapped in the colors of our free Azania? They arrested the bedspread. They and their friends are working to arrest the dreams in our heads. And the women, accustomed to closing the eyes of the dead, are weaving cloths still brighter to drape us in glory in a free Azania.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Ababio. So movingly delivered. Before I invite Mr. Norty Antoine to introduce the guest speaker, just to let you know that there will be a question and answer section after the presentation. So if you have any comments or questions for Dr. Angu, you are asked to put it in the chat and they will be conveyed to him at the end. So I'm going to now turn over to one of our senior academic literacy instructors based at the Western Jamaica campus of the university, Mr. Norty Antoine. I call him Sir Norty Antoine.
Thank you. In Afrikaans, hallo. In Xhosa, molweni. In Zulu, sawubona. And in Pedi, dumela. In English, good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce the guest speaker for the inaugural language section week, my brethren, Dr. Pinete Angu. Dr. Pinete Angu is an associate professor and director of the Unit for Academic Literacy at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. He has written and published on student writing in higher education and curriculum decolonization in the context of academic literacy. Currently, he is involved in a funded project which seeks to promote multilingualism in academic literacy courses and writing centers. Dr. Angu is also passionate about transnational migration and the politics of inclusion and exclusion. Notably, he has written extensively on the experiences of African migrants, xenophobia, or more specifically, Afrophobia, and the complexities of belonging in a period of deepening anti-immigrant activism in post-apartheid South Africa. Members of the audience, please welcome Dr. Pinete Angu as he shares with us on academic literacy teaching in an era of disruptions, thinking from the South African higher education context and beyond. Over to you, Dr. Angu.
Thank you, Sir Norty Antoine. Colleagues, I hope you can hear me.
For you, loud and clear.
Definitely.
Great. Okay, thank you very much for the warm welcome. I think it's about 2 a.m. in South Africa. I was about to fall asleep, but just listening to you, the different speakers, the HOD, the Dean of the Faculty talk about the amazing work that you guys are doing at your university, there's no way I can fall asleep. So thank you indeed for the opportunity. I am indeed honored to be part of this very special event. And I think today I will be sharing a set of ideas with you, ideas that I think are not yet refined, things that have been going through my mind after teaching academic literacy for several years. But before I do that, I will want to extend a very special thank you to Dr. Dash and my esteemed friend, Sir Naughty Antoine, for in a way resuscitating this conversation. When we met I think in Sweden a few years back, we left promising to collaborate, but then COVID happened, and we're all then trying to survive. And after COVID, you reconnected, and I really appreciate the fact that you guys had to reconnect and ask us to start the conversation again. And here we are today in a very special event, and which will give us the opportunity to share our ideas on how, not just how to collaborate, but how to advance academic literacy in higher education. So indeed, I am really honored to be part of this very special event. And I hope that the ideas that I'm going to share with you today will sort of inspire some thinking, again, some kind of discussion going forward as we try to establish collaboration between the two departments. All right. So let me share my slides and then get onto it. I hope. Please you just have to give me some time to get this sorted out. I'm not sure. Let's do that. I need to get to Can we see the slides?
Seeing the slide.
Can we please just confirm whether we can see my my slide?
Not seeing the slide right now, no.
Okay, you can't. Hello?
Seeing the slide. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? We're not seeing the slides. Okay. Will you try to share again?
Let me try again. I did test this when we let's do that. Let me try to share again. Okay. All right. It says, can you see?
Seeing the file, but the file isn't open yet.
Yeah, seeing your screen, but not the lecture itself, not the PowerPoint.
Okay, yes. Yes,
seeing
we're
it
seeing
now.
it
Seeing
now.
it now.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Again, technology usually sort of stresses our lives sometimes. So indeed, thank you. And of course, the previous speakers spoke about what I would like to talk about today, which is academic literacy teaching in an era of disruptions, thinking from the South African higher education context and beyond. And I think I've been toying with this idea for years now, so playing around with, especially when I took over as the HOD of the Unit for Academic Literacy. And one of my goals was to sort of shift the thinking around the way we teach academic literacy. In fact, what we teach and how we teach it and why we're teaching our students. And I think throughout my presentation, you sort of get a sense of why I decided to frame this particular talk around the set of disruptions. And I was very happy that the Dean spoke about several disruptions, and I'm just going to piggyback on a few of them, being mindful that there are several disruptions out there. And before I do that, I would sort of start by sharing this my experience at the University of Pretoria about what colleagues often say to me when we talk about academic literacy. So very often when they meet me, they will usually ask me, "Oh, what do you teach?" I would tell them, "Well, I teach academic literacy." They say, "Okay, what is that?" I said, "Well, we basically teach students academic reading and writing." And they would say, "Well, that's good. That's great, because we think they really need those skills." And then they'll move on to say, "Well, our students cannot write." And then I say, "But what do you mean your students cannot write?" And they'll say to me, "Well, their English is terrible. The grammar is terrible. They can't even spell. They can't even string sentences together." And very often I'll say to them that if that's your problem, then we really don't have a problem at all. And I'll talk about that as I present my ideas here. So I often sort of have this type of engagement with colleagues, thinking that academic literacy is about the very technical aspects of writing, and which is something that I criticize even in my own writing. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from, and I'll sort of take you through my set of ideas and why I think we need to be thinking beyond just the technical aspects of academic literacy. Okay, another thing. So the key question that I've been grappling with for so many years now is what and how should we be teaching academic literacy in an era of disruption? And I'll look at four disruptions. I'll look at four disruptions. The first one being the roads must fall, the second one being the fee must fall, and of course the two other global disruptions, which are the COVID pandemic and more recently generative AI, ChatGPT, specifically ChatGPT. But before I get to talking about those disruptions, I want us to sort of paint a picture about the South African higher education context before these disruptions and now. And if we talk about the South African higher education context today, we talk about the need for transformation. They want to increase, coming from a history of apartheid, they want to increase access to higher education for the wider population of South African. So what we're dealing with today is what we're now calling the massification, in broad terms, the massification of higher education. But underpinning that massification of South African higher education is a rich diversity of students coming from different background, coming from different social background, economic background, schooling background. So what we're grappling with today is not just a group of students coming from different backgrounds, but it's also the question of affordability. The question of affordability in the sense that higher education is, even though it's more accessible now to a lot of students, it is equally very expensive. And hence the fee must fall movement, which I'm going to talk about. But given that we're coming from a history of apartheid, colonialism, our higher education, some of our higher education institutions are still trying to let go of the past. So we talk about the resilient past and an institutional culture, which is very exclusionary, it sort of excludes a lot of students. And of course, again, within the same spaces, we're talking about the certain levels of inequality. I spoke to you just a few minutes about the diversity, and that diversity, behind that diversity, it's some kind of social inequality. So we have a group of students in the same space from different backgrounds, from different economic backgrounds, struggling to navigate a very complex higher education context. But apart from that, we're now talking about the politics of knowledge within South African higher education. What exactly should we be teaching our students? How should we be teaching, and who should be teaching the students in the first place? Hence, the Roads Must Fall movement. And key to all of this issue is the question of language. And also, as in my introduction, to talk about our involvement in multilingualism. So there is a whole move in South Africa today that we need to introduce multilingual education at high school level, at university level rather. And the government is coming down very strong that we need to develop other African languages into the languages of teaching and learning as well as research. So in a sense, this is where I'm coming from. This is the background of the South African higher education context. So thinking from this background, I want to then frame my conversation this evening around this very four disruption again, being mindful that there are other disruptions, as the Dean quite rightly pointed out. But I'm going to focus on these four key disruptions. And these disruptions have radically changed the higher education context in South Africa, and it's never going to be the same in my estimation. So that the higher education context in South Africa has changed. It's never going to go back to where it was before. So the two very context-specific ones are the Rhodes Must Fall and the Field Must Fall. And I'm sure that you were familiar when this happened in 2016/2017, it gripped the entire world. So it spread all over the world. In the UK, everybody was now talking about the need to decolonize education, thinking from the statue, the fall of Cecil, the statue of Cecil Rhodes. And of course, that was immediately followed by the Field Must Fall movement. Field Must Fall movement, where students were saying, look, we are paying too much. When the new government took over, they promised us free education, but that has not happened. So we are paying heavily. We come from very poor backgrounds, so we are paying too much for education. So immediately after Rhodes fell, the Field Must Fall movement followed after that. And what have I learned from this? What have I learned from this two movements? I think the first thing that when the statue of Cecil Rhodes fell, the whole debate about knowledge became central, and why we need to decolonize the curriculum. All right. And so students were arguing that, yes, they are, in a sense, paying high tuition fee for knowledge that was not very relevant to their context, which is something that is we can talk about it. But that's what students felt, that, yes, we're paying for this, but you're teaching us something that's not really very relevant to the South African context or to the African context. But what was also particularly interesting for me are the type of arguments or counter arguments why Rhodes statue must or must not fall. And I think there were people arguing that, well, the land, remember, Rhodes statue was at UCT in Cape Town, and they presented the argument that that land was actually given to the university by Cecil Rhodes. So the colonial imperialists we need to honor him because he gave land to the university, and that's where the University of Cape Town is now located. The question we asked then was, whose land was it in the first place? And that was the question that students were asking, whose land was it in the first place? But also the other argument was that, well, Cecil Rhodes bequeathed a huge amount of money, which is now then given to a lot of South Africans in the form of scholarships. And again, the issue was then, do we cleanse Cecil Rhodes of his sins, of the atrocities that he did in South Africa, simply on the basis, do we immortalize him simply on the basis that he is given some money, money that was accrued from resources in South Africa in the first place? So that's good. But of course, another thing that I've learned from this disruption is the fact that a resilient past, that we're dealing with a very resilient past, and universities in a way are becoming complicit, entrenched in this past. But one of the things that also happened during this movement was the anger, the pain, and that pain was performed in what I call very crude violence. And perhaps the people were asking us, but why is it that students are destroying property? Why is it that they're destroying the same infrastructure that they would need when they decolonize the curriculum, when education becomes free? But what we need to understand is that we need to look at the violence that was happening at the universities at that time within the broader context of violence in South Africa in general. And that violence is coming from the pain, the anger, and the suffering of majority of South Africans. So, and because of their frustration, they start expressing this anger, they start expressing this pain, this suffering in forms of violence. And when you ask students, they'll tell you that's the only language that the government listens to. That's the only language that the university listens to. So they've been talking to the university, but the university has not been listening to them. I often ask them, but how have you been talking to the university? Which is something that's good. But of course, we are dealing with a group of students who are all about their rights. You know, we have the right to free education. We have the right to be heard. It's just what's important. But of course, what about their responsibilities? This disruptions also sort of pointed to the idea of academic freedom and the right to protest in public universities, especially the way the universities reacted to it. And I pointed out in one of my papers how the universities became the kind of the militarized universities. They put high biometric security around many universities to basically monitor protesters. Yeah. And of course, apart from that, there's the whole issue of language and multilingualism. And of course, how do we position African knowledge system in a globally connected world, which is something that the likes of Ashim Bembe have been talking about very, very critically, and what should replace the decolonized curriculum in the first place. So for me, I think what we need to be doing as academic staff is to be very intentional about what we teach and how we teach it to our students. The two other disruptions was sort of the kind of the COVID-19 and more recently generative artificial intelligence, particularly ChatGPT. And what are the lessons for me? I mean, I think COVID-19 basically revealed the level of inequality in South Africa and the world. So people would argue that it was a great equalizer, but in my view, it wasn't. It actually revealed our inequalities in society, in the world that we live in. I mean, in South Africa, even though we went online, there were students who could not connect, who did not have access to devices at all, you know. And this picture basically tells you, I mean, I can talk about it later, but tells you, so it paints the kind of a clear picture of the inequality in South Africa. But for me, it was also about the issue of digital transformation versus digital inequalities. So because we're talking about a context with social inequality, that immediately translates into digital inequality. But within our context, we have people who are pro-technology and those who are anti-technology, okay? And now that we're dealing with ChatGPT, some who are very paranoid about what ChatGPT is doing, especially to academic writing, but some who are also very obsessed about it and trying to talk about the limitless, if I may, the limitless advantages of using ChatGPT as a tool for teaching and learning, which of course is something that it's worth engaging on. But when we talk about COVID-19, it was, for me, the tension was about, was it really about resilience or was it about human survival in the first place, you know? And again, we're now talking about, in this context of technology, different types of technologies, we're now talking about how do we negotiate very traditional ways of teaching to these new modes of teaching and learning driven by technology. So those are some of the things that I picked up from these two disruptions. So thinking from the background of these disruptions, what type of students are we dealing with in the South African context? First, we're dealing with very politically conscious students and who are very ready at any time to exercise their agency. I mean, I'm not in any way saying that the previous generation was not politically active. We were politically active, but this is a particular generation of students who are ready to voice their grievances and push until they get what they want. I mean, during meetings with student representative council, they will often ask them, why should we give you free education? And the response, which is something that one of our foremost writers have pointed out, Professor Janssen, is that when you ask students, why do you need this thing? They tell you, is if you do not give us these things, we are going to burn down the university. We're going to put everything to a standstill. So those are the type of students that we but for me, most importantly, they're concerned about what we teach them. But of course, these are also students who are conflicted about the hegemony of English and multilingualism in higher education. When we talk about the need for multilingualism, some of them will say, no, we prefer to study in English because there are opportunities out there. So if I study in my home language, what opportunities do I have? You see, so, but for them, it is a matter of replacing one with the other, which is not actually the case. As I've also said, these are a group of students who in a way are very obsessed with their rights, but less concerned about their responsibilities. These are students who are digitally active, but also struggling with information overload. You see that in the way they write. And something that's very important to me is the fact that their minds are often influenced by fake news and misinformation. So they have access to a lot of information, but they do not have the critical or the cognitive competencies to analyze, select what they need for whatever purpose. But these are students who are also grappling with the idea that they don't understand why they should be doing academic literacy in the first place, because they come from high schools with good English marks. So why should they do academic literacy? But they are also ready to be challenged. So we should be in a position to challenge their thinking. So how are these issues influencing the teaching of academic literacy in South Africa? I go back to one of the very important definitions of what higher education means. And I'll quote from Brian Street and some of the key names in academic literacy in South Africa, Bowe and McKechnie. And they say higher education is about adapting to new ways of knowing, new ways of understanding, interpreting, organizing knowledge in different disciplines. So what does that mean to me? It means we're talking about thinking, sort of socializing our students to think like university students, to construct knowledge like university students, to share and contest knowledge like university students. And that's what academic literacy means to me. But before I deal with that further, let me sort of share with you some of the very common myths in South Africa, which sort of inform where I'm coming from. The first thing is people often believe in South Africa that the declining academic literacy standards, it's actually a South African problem. And I've always argued that no, it's not a South African problem. This is a global problem as a result of the massification of higher education globally. And some staff members also believe that university students in South Africa actually have a problem which requires fixing. They also think that when you fix their grammar, their sentences, and their paragraph, then they will be fine. This is another myth. And for some, second language speakers of English are the most affected, and Black students struggle at university because of language problems. They also believe that mother tongue speakers of English have no academic literacy problems. And lastly, it is the responsibility of academic literacy practitioners to fix these problems and not disciplinary lecturers. So it's not their consent, it's our problem. So we need to fix that problem. So very often they will send students to us and say, yeah, they cannot write, we need to get them to write. So we think from these stereotypes, from this myth. And what we've been doing in our unit is we've been trying to debunk all this myth going forward. So what are the implications? What are the teaching and learning implications in the South African context? The one thing that we need to know about the South African context is that because many of the students come from very impoverished background, they see university education as a poverty exit strategy. So when they come to the university, their parents are actually hoping that when they finish their university, they're going to find a job and get them out of poverty. So we should be producing, from a South African context, we should be producing graduates for the South African market, but who can also play in the global space. Graduates who can navigate a complex and a rapidly changing digital world. That's the type of graduate student that we should be producing. But also we need to reimagine the university curricula, not to only talk about academic excellence, but also talk about knowledge relevance. We often talk about excellence, and Mahmoud Mamdani talks about this when he deals with the issue of the politics of language in African higher education, that we often talk about academic excellence, but we're ignoring the relevance of what we're actually teaching our students. As a result, we have all of these contestations around the forms of knowledge for African students. So during the protest, during the Rhodes Must Fall movement, students were saying to us, no, you cannot, let's stop teaching them European knowledge system and come back home. Let's teach them Fanon, let's teach them Steve Biko, they say that. But they were not engaging very critically with these conversations. But also we're looking at what role can multilingualism play in disrupting the dominance of English in South African higher education. My university, the medium of instruction at my university is English. Even though they said we need to promote other African languages, we need to support students. And most of these students come from schooling backgrounds or most of them are second and third language speakers of English. But how do we then deal with, now that we're talking about all of these things, how do we deal with this new disruption, ChatGPT in our teaching and learning spaces? So for me, academic literacy is about socializing students in the multiple ways that knowledge is constructed and shared in higher education. It's about epistemological access, taking into account disciplinary norms, cultural and contextual aspects of student learning. So we need to approach academic literacy as a social practice. We should allow students to draw on their cultural background, lived experiences, and knowledge of the world to construct or contest knowledge in higher education. We need to approach academic reading and writing as a socially and contextually situated practices. And students' academic literacy challenges are expected to worsen because of increasing access and the fact that academic literacy is no one's mother tongue. So we're going to be confronted with the same challenges, even worse than before. The more we get, and in South Africa, every year we get a completely new breed of student, new cohort of students with new set of academic literacy challenges. So things are probably going to get worse. So we need to prepare our minds for that. And I remember when the HOD spoke about our unit, she said we're still using the singular academic literacy. But what we're saying to our colleagues is now we need to shift from academic literacy to academic literacies, which is what you guys are already doing in Jamaica. Because we're now talking about academic literacies. We're talking about multi-literacies. So a student coming to the university must leave the university with a set of literacies, So that's what we're now talking about. We need to understand the demands of the job market and prepare our students for the workplace. What in South Africa, we're now talking about the 21st century graduate attributes. We need to understand that we are preparing students to be employers or employees in a rapidly changing world. And we cannot run away from technology. And the truth is that we kind of run away from technology. Ashimeme talks about how in most African communities today, when they think about food, they also think about smartphones in the same sentence. So we cannot run away from technology. But what we need to be thinking about is how do we use technology to increase access, to enrich teaching and learning, but also being mindful of the existing digital inequalities. But most importantly, we need to focus on, which is something that your HOD pointed, we need to focus on the development of cognitive competencies that can help students to better understand the world that they live in. And how do we do this? This is what I'm thinking. That we need to reimagine academic literacy as a mode of reasoning. And a mode of reasoning which is basically influenced by context, influenced by discipline, and influenced by experiences before we think of it as a mode of communication. What people have been doing in my context is looking at academic literacy primarily as a mode of communication. But I'm saying that we need to look at it as a mode of reasoning, how you think and how you share, how you construct and how you contest knowledge or how you share knowledge. And I often like to use the metaphor of the bag. And the metaphor of the bag says, when you sort of present a shopping bag to someone, they're not concerned about how the bag looks, how beautiful the bag is. They're more concerned about what's inside the bag. So very often we pay attention. So that's where most of my colleagues get it wrong. So let's fix their grammar. Those are very cosmetic things. Let's fix their grammar. Let's fix their sentences. Let's fix their spelling. But they're not looking at what's inside what students write, what's the thinking behind the way our students are writing. All right. So this is my idea of academic literacy, that we need to focus on high-order thinking skills, critical thinking, creative thinking, how to analyze, how to synthesize ideas, how to evaluate ideas. Before we come down to the very basic academic skills, then we need to blend this with professional skills. So if you're teaching academic literacy in a particular discipline, you need to be concerned about what are the set of skills that they need to be able to perform when they graduate, not just academically, but to perform the job that they're actually aspiring for. But also we think that our students need to be globally aware. They need to see how different disruptions around the world are influencing their lives. So they need to be able to connect, to think about how the world connects together and how it is actually affecting their lives. So that's my model of academic literacy teaching. And but whose responsibility is it to do all of these things? I believe that we cannot do this alone. From my experience, academic literacy departments cannot handle this without the disciplinary experts, without the university management. Now, in my context, what the university said, yes, we understand that students have language and literacy problems, but very often they do not invest in human resources. So we always struggle with staff capacity. We basically teach academic literacy across 9 different faculties, across 7 different faculties, with a very small staff composition. So universities need to come to the party. If we think this is a serious problem, which I think it is, we need to come to the party. Universities need to invest in this. We need to be able to collaborate with disciplinary experts, because we know we're not just providing them with generic skills, we're also providing with very discipline-specific academic literacy competencies. So you cannot do that without the collaboration of disciplines. So I see this as a collective endeavor for us to succeed in providing the quality of academic literacy support. Discipline specialists need to come on board. The university management needs to come on board, and resource the units that are mandated to provide academic literacy support. So let me end up with some very three important quotes from key academic literacy practitioners in South Africa and some beyond. And the first one is critical reading, for example, is often thought as if it was a neutral skill involving the identification of keywords or the use of headings and subheadings to negotiate a text. In the academy, however, the term critical reading refers to something very different, the ability to use our knowledge of the world and our knowledge of all that text to interrogate and challenge the text that we're reading. Critical reading entails being inclined to take a position in response to a text, which may include questioning its very basis. The second one, academic literacy courses often focus on grammar or language structure, such as structuring an essay around an introduction, body, and conclusion. While technical accuracies and structure are important, it is the production of an argument that is central to writing in the academy, where the term argument is used very specifically to refer to the construction of a series of claims, each of which is supported by evidence to support a series of more encompassing claims embodying a particular position, the argument itself. The last quote, academic writing is not a generic skill that can be taught, then applied uncritically or unadapted across the disciplines, with students picking up the implicit disciplinary rules and conventions as they move between different disciplinary spaces. On that, I say, thank you very much for listening. Merci, Yabonga, Kaliboga, Nkosi, and Danki. Thank you very much.
I want to say thank you, Dr. Angu, for really providing us with, in a very passionate and engaging way, with a great deal of ideas to mull over, to digest, some of which are actually new in terms, and some information which I think certainly for me was new in terms of just not being aware of the situation with the disruption that had to do with students and fees and their very activist and maybe combative nature. I'm thinking that there are lots of points of overlap in terms of what we experience here, but the way in which you have put forward your whole argument and the lens that you have introduced us to, I think it's something that we all really would like to will spend a little bit of time considering against the background of where we are. And I'm sure that there are some comments and questions in the chat. So what I'm going to do is read them for you, and then you can weigh in on them. So the very first one is from our HOD, Dr. Milson Wright, and she's asking for a little bit more information about class size in your university's academic literacy classes. That's the first one. So you can go with that one, and then I will come on. Yes.
Yes, I mean, when we talk about academic literacy, the issue of class sizes is always a problem. I mean, we have very large classes. I mean, we teach, as I said, we teach across 7 faculties. And one of our biggest faculties is the Faculty of Natural Sciences. And our first years, it's basically 1,000, around about 1,500 first years from natural sciences alone. And of course, given the number of staff members that we have, we unfortunately have to deal with very, very, very big classes, unfortunately, because I mean, the University of Pretoria is quite a big university. Our student numbers are sitting at about 60,000. So we unfortunately have to deal with very large classes. And that has a very negative effect on the quality of academic literacy support that we provide to students. I mean, even though we divide them into groups, a group can easily be about 100. And how do we then interact with students, 100 of them in the classroom, which is something that we've been struggling with. And I think one thing that could possibly help us would be if we had tutors to then deal with assist the students after our lectures. But we don't have the resources to put in place a very solid tutorial system. So yes, we deal with very large classes, and it has very serious negative impact on the quality of teaching.
So you mentioned large classes in up to even a 100. So that would be more a kind of lecture format, not as you see seminars or tutorials. Okay, that's very interesting, and that's actually for us that's hard to wrap our minds around. You say it's across 7 faculties.
Yeah.
Okay. There's another question in terms of what. Let me go up a little bit. What exactly is the focus in the course or the courses that you teach? What would be the name, the nomenclature that you use for your courses, and what's the focus for you?
Well, most of these courses are sort of designed in collaboration with the disciplines. So the disciplines will tell us exactly what they would like us to focus on. But very often we focus on the very similar thing that you guys focus on. We focus on academic reading, we focus on academic writing, we focus on technical writing. So if we're teaching in a faculty like natural sciences, we have to focus on writing lab reports. If we're teaching in the faculty of law, for example, we need to include public speaking. In law, we're now also thinking about the set of professional, what we call professional literacy. So we're trying to include things like teamwork, teach them how to work in teams, teach them how to oral presentation skills as part of our courses. But our core focus is still academic reading and academic writing, with a strong focus on argumentation. But again, as I said, we deal with argumentation not in the way that we would have loved to. That's sort of the key area. But again, they all depend on what that particular faculty wants. So,
okay, I think the question.
But the one thing that we don't do, we don't focus on grammar a lot. We don't focus on grammar. If they need someone to edit their grammar, we send them to the writing center. Say, go to the writing center. Not even the writing center. Even the writing center doesn't do that. We say, look, we're not, it's not our responsibility to deal with your grammar. We want to deal with much more deeper issues. So most of our courses really do not deal with grammatical issues, unless they are very, very serious ones.
Thank you. Oh, just a follow-up question in terms of that. So would that mean that your courses are not just at year 1 level? You would actually be having courses for second and final year students, or are you still basically existing at the foundation level? But you're still customizing it for the disciplines?
Yes.
Yes,
we wish. I mean, our argument has been that the student cannot develop these competencies within a year. So unfortunately, we only teach at first year level, but we've been pushing for scaffolding these things throughout a degree program, because our research shows that it takes you about 2 to 3 years to start mastering some of this academic literacy competencies. But unfortunately, as I said, universities are not investing in this thing. So in some of our faculties, we actually do it in a semester. We're expected to do this in a semester, and our semester is about just 14 weeks, all right? In some faculties, some faculties are quite generous, and they say to us, well, you can do it in a year, in 1 year, which gives us a little bit more time. It gives us a little bit more time to engage with students on some of the different aspects. But typically, our courses are semester courses for 14 weeks. And we've always made the argument that there's nothing we can achieve in 14 weeks. It's almost impossible to do the things that you guys want us to do in 14 weeks and expect the type of results that you want to see in your students. That for us, we say to them that, look, these things are lifelong. It's not something that you can do and sort of stop. Then said you need to burn them into the curriculum all the way through their degree programs. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of doing that. Thank you.
Okay, before we go on to the next question, just a quick one. So in terms of you say that you would do the lab report, would do public speaking for law students. So what is the extent of the collaboration with the people with the colleagues in the discipline? In terms of the assignments and the structure of the course, how close is that, or how not close?
Look, you should know. I think if you've been in this field, you will know that collaborating with disciplines is not an easy thing. So you will have some disciplines that are willing to collaborate, but some are very resistant to. They basically say, no, we don't have the time to collaborate. You have to do this, and so we've been preaching to them that there's no way this thing can be beneficial to your students if we do not work together. And that's the message that we've been pushing across the university, that we need sustained collaboration between academic literacy practitioners and disciplinary experts. But they're often people who are very resistant to that.
Okay. Another question, in terms of student agency in South Africa, does that carry over into the academic literacy classrooms in relation to what they are taught in terms of student agency?
Yes, we, as I pointed out, our students, yes, they have this kind of the agency. I mean, they exercise their agency in different ways. From a protest perspective, from an activist perspective, they're quite good at that. But when they come to classroom, of course, we don't see that very often in our classroom spaces. We want to get them to engage with us, to have debate with us in our classroom spaces, but we don't see that very much. So there's a whole difference of the way they exercise their agency from a kind of very political sense, where you can protest action and all of that thing. You see them very vocal about that. But what we want to see is being able to interrogate, being able to contest some of the conversations that are happening around the university within the classroom space. And that type of agency is still very lacking. Yes, you can see, well, these are first-year students, by the way, and the protest was done by all students from a different level all the way to postgraduate level. But at first-year level, we're still dealing with a group of students who come and sit in class and just expect you to tell them what to do. But now, of course, we need to find ways to be able to get them to exercise their agency more in class, and those are some of the things that we're trying to build into our kind of our pedagogical approaches. Because I think when they talk about the thing, kind of you listen to the way they engage about the whole idea of decolonizing knowledge, we want to see more critical engagement in that, and we're not seeing that very clearly in our courses. As I said, these are first-year students, and some of them just to socialize, get used to the university context takes them quite some time. Remember, Pretoria University is a former Afrikaans university, and so just getting a sense of belonging in the university for a first-year student, let alone engaging constructively in academic debate, is something that takes a while to develop, because the university itself is still very, as I say in my presentation, we're still dealing with a very resilient past. So.
Okay, some more questions still on the question of discipline-specific interaction with the people in the disciplines. Comment. I'm always fascinated by sorry, not that one. So someone is saying that you mentioned disciplinary specialists. Can you say a bit more about it and give examples? Are you referring to historians, linguists, economists? Is that who you're talking about?
Yes. So this is what would happen. So if we are in the Faculty of Humanities, for example, we do teach in the Faculty of Humanities, we'll now have to collaborate with historians, with people teaching history, linguists in the department, in the different departments. If we're teaching in law, the disciplinary experts will be law lecturers, for example. If we're teaching in natural sciences, the disciplinary specialists will be academics in the natural sciences. So that's what we mean by the kind of discipline specialists.
Okay, and who has, in terms of your autonomy, in those relationships, does the kind of buck stop with you, with the academic literacy practitioners in terms of final decisions, or is there, how much leeway do you have, or how much leeway do they have in terms of determining what students eventually, what the curriculum looks like?
Look, it will all depend on. It will depend on faculty, different disciplines.
Okay.
Different departments will want to listen to us. They consider us as the experts in quote unquote, the experts in the field. So people will understand what they're supposed to do. Some are very sort of prescriptive. They're very prescriptive. They tell us this is what we want you to teach our students. I remember we recently designed a course for accounting students, and they told us that we wanted them to do some oral presentation to focus on oral presentation skills, and they told us categorically that they don't need that. In law, when we designed a curriculum for law, and we said, look, we need to equip them with the type of literacies that they need in the profession, such things like public speaking, like teamwork. The department said, no, we just want them to pass, and that's important for them. And I said, well, look, when they pass, not a lot of them are not going to end at the university. Some of them are going to go out and work. So we need to be able to balance that. So there's a whole negotiation. We have to constantly negotiate this thing. And of course, higher education, they always power dynamics. They always power dynamics. And they often look down on academic literacy lecturers, and it comes back, and that's why I had to talk to you about the myth about these things. So some of them think that's just English, just basic plain grammar. Okay. As a result, they don't really take it seriously, and that's why they give us 14 weeks to do that. And so and consequently, even some students don't take us seriously, So when in such faculties, it's always very difficult to negotiate a way. But as I said, it would vary from some are very, very understanding, they're very accommodating, they value what we do, they understand that students need this thing, and they often would allow us the flexibility to advise them on what we think is good for their students.
Okay, so you can't generalize, as you say, it depends on the individual department. And I guess often on the fact that the players change often. So, you might actually, have a good relationship, and then someone moves on and you have a new individual. Okay, so there's a question there that says, from the Rhodes movement to now, how much decolonization of the curriculum has taken place? Or how much, has developed?
Well, it seems as if we're taking steps backward instead of moving forward. That's my view about it. A lot has not happened. That hype at that time is gone. Students are now thinking about other things. But universities have what we call curriculum transformation committees. And what happens in those transformation committees that they're supposed to oversee the transformation of the curriculum. So in my estimation, not a lot has happened from I can't speak for the entire university, but not a lot has happened in especially in my faculty, which is the humanities faculties. But we are making some significant steps towards that. But if you look at the hype during the Mos Four movement, the amount of destruction that happened at that time, one would think that could have easily translated into more rapid results, but it hasn't happened that way. So in a sense, students have moved on to other things. They've moved on to other things, but behind the scenes, we're still pushing for that to happen from our own perspective, from an academic literacy perspective. We're pushing for that to happen. That even though we teach academic literacy in English, we need to be mindful of what we're teaching our students, how we're teaching us, how do we allow them to bring their own experiences, their home experiences into the classroom, how do you have around the kind of the African so even the type of text that we're going to use in our classes are going to be very different, with text that students can easily relate to, for example. So yes, one would love to see rapid changes, but it's a very complex, I would call it the politics of knowledge in South African education. Higher education is quite a complex one, because you see a lot of resistance. You see a lot of resistance coming from a lot of academics as well. Some saying that, look, there's some discipline that cannot be decolonized. And again, there's a whole question of what is it that we're decolonizing in the first place, So we've been spending a lot of time debating the issues going back, and so what I would have loved to see kind of a more rapid thing, but again, it's not as far. But we're making significant strides in that regard.
I was struck by when you said that you had introduced Fanon and Biko in terms of decolonizing the curriculum, but there wasn't much take-up of it by the students. So that reflects what you're saying in terms of,
You're breaking.
Okay. Are you hearing me now?
Yeah.
Yes, I was saying that you, in relation to what you just said, you had mentioned that in decolonizing the curriculum, you had tried to get Fanon and Biko texts and get students to engage with it, but there wasn't much interest in it.
What I meant is that students were asking for that. No, we shouldn't be teaching them. Well, let me use for kind of example, like for code, for example, we shouldn't be teaching them for code. We should be teaching them Fanon. We should be teaching them Steve Biko's Black Consciousness movement, and that those are the type of texts that they want to the university to introduce in the curriculum. Of course, some of these things are already happening in departments like philosophy. But I think what for us is more important is the fact that yes, you can introduce Biko, you can introduce Fanon, but you need to be able to understand the kind of Fanonian writing, and also even understand who actually influenced Fanon, and also the fact that Fanon itself was written at a particular time, and whether things are the same. So students need to be able to engage with this text, even though the African text, they know about African experiences, but they need to also be critical about them, because for us, the idea, for me in particular, the idea of decolonizing is not just replacing one with the other. I believe that in a global context that we are in, you need to be able to engage with different bodies of knowledge. But it is basically how you engage with those different bodies of knowledge. The problem has been that African students have actually been sort of confirming knowledge, sort of accepting like a kind of in a way that this is kind of universal truth, instead of being more critical with the text. And even if we were to introduce African texts are not uncritical, So if we have to go back to Africa, we need to be able to criticize African texts as well. So we need to be able to develop that students, to get students that have that critical mind to say, look, from a humanities perspective, knowledge is always contested. We can always contest knowledge. And I said, so that's what I was saying, that they were just asking for this thing. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of that. But we're saying that we need to recenter, in a sense, recenter African ways of doing and knowing and being, and think from Africa, then globally. You know, unlike now that we actually thinking from the West to Africa, we now need to change that around, but not disconnect ourselves from the rest of the world, you know. And I want my student to be able to say, yes, I can read Foucault. I need to be able to understand Foucault, critique Foucault, not accept it, you know. And which is something that the students are grappling with.
Rather than a question, it says literacy is about critical thinking and creative thinking. Why is there no noticeable synergy between academic literacy and philosophy in terms of curriculum collaboration? That's the question. And right, could you see that from your point of view? Is there, maybe perhaps you need to start with, is there a synergy between academic literacy and philosophy in your institution?
Indeed, you're right. I mean, it's an important question. This is where most of those skills are based, in a way. You can't do philosophy without being critical, you know. And I think one of our main supporters in the Faculty of Humanities has actually been the Department of Philosophy. You know, they understand us better than any other. They understand us better than any other discipline. So yes, we are always in conversation with them. But as a department, most of their students don't do academic literacy because of the simple fact that if you study, you cannot do philosophy. So these skills are already embedded in their kind of pedagogical practices. So there are conversations between our unit and the philosophy department, but so they can provide us with advice on how to design our curriculum, but we don't actually teach them. We don't teach them because there's no need for us to teach philosophy students academic literacy, because their lecturers are already, part of their teaching includes critical thinking, basically logical thinking. So there's no need for us to do that. But I think from a humanities perspective, they are one of our strongest supporters, you know, and they are the ones who keep saying to people that academic literacy is not stringing sentences together. That's not academic literacy. It's way beyond that.
Okay. I have a question, since I don't see any more in the chat right now, and that is maybe shifting the focus a little bit to multilingualism. My question is, for example, your University of Pretoria, are the criteria to get in, is it English only qualifications? Is there at the secondary level any kind of opportunity for students to qualify in languages other than English? What about Afrikaans? What role does Afrikaans still play in terms of the university? And is your institution English only, or is it multilingual in terms of that? So if you could give us a little bit of, you know, a kind of background on that.
Yes. Well, when I joined the university, it was dual medium. That was English and Afrikaans, because the University of Pretoria I joined in 2016. The University of Pretoria is a former Afrikaans university. It was a former Afrikaans university. Then post-apartheid, it became a dual medium, English and Afrikaans. Then after the student protests in 2017, after Rhodes must fall and Fee must fall, one of the issues, as I pointed out, was the issue of language, and where students were arguing that English is becoming a barrier to access to knowledge. However, they were conflicted between getting free education and investing money into developing other languages. So what then happened at that time is that the university then decided why students were complaining about Afrikaans. They're saying, well, Afrikaans students are being privileged because at that time, Afrikaans students were getting classes in typically Afrikaans. So they can actually teach them Afrikaans, while all other students were getting classes all in English, which was a disadvantage for African students who come from who are second or even third language speakers of English. So while African students were getting tuition in their mother tongue, other students were getting it in English, not in their own mother tongue. So when they protested, it then came down to the point where the university then decided at that time that, look, there will be one medium of instruction, and that medium of instruction will be English only. But of course, given the Afrikaans and the prominence of Afrikaans, it still has a very strong presence. It still has a very strong presence at the university. So what's happening now is that the government is actually coming down very hard on universities to say, look, you need to develop the other languages into languages of teaching and learning, into languages of research. And that's what is actually happening now at our university and other universities in South Africa. So yes, at the moment, officially, it is monolingual and it's English. But they're making provision for support in the different mother tongues. So at my university, we're providing, where necessary, we provide support in Sepedi, which is the regional language in my province, because in South Africa, they now have 12 languages, including sign language, official languages. So what universities would do is they'll focus on the language, the dominant language of that particular location or that particular province or that particular area. So in where we base, we look at on the language. The other African language is Sepedi. So you will have English, Afrikaans, and Sepedi. So you go to another place, to another university, it would be English and Zulu. You go to another place here because that's the language that's predominantly spoken in that particular area. So that's the situation at the university as we speak.
Progress in terms of bringing in the more indigenous languages. Two more comments I'm seeing here, or questions. One says, what would we do if we were to face the demand from our students to get rid of the colonial standards and allow for greater expression of their own lives, culture? What would we do?
I don't
If you want to go on first, say.
I don't know. I have different views on it. I mean, perhaps it's also because I'm not originally from South Africa, and I think we need it's important for us to make knowledge relevant to our students. That's important, and also it's important for us to teach them what they can relate to. All right. Those are things that I find very important, because for me, I believe that, you know, if a student can relate to something, it's easy for them to understand it, which is different if I'm reading a text, if I'm reading a text that's very Western, and I'm reading a text that's very Western, of course, I struggle to relate to that, then affect my understanding of that text. Be that as it may, students will always, we're struggling as staff members. We have students on the one hand, we have the university on the other hand, saying that, look, as part of an international university, these are some of the things that you need to be doing to make sure that we maintain our ranking as a university. And some of those things go against the whole idea of decolonizing in the first place. So there are those tensions and sometimes staff members are caught in between. They get caught in between that and there. And even sometimes students they have their own preferences. And we want to do this, we want to do that. The issue of language is one of them, where students have basically said, look, we would rather be taught in English because of opportunities out there. And so even when we want to teach them in their mother tongue, they'll say, look, some of them will even argue that they don't have the academic vocabulary in their mother tongue. So they can't even do that, because we're looking at, well, if language then brings its culture, brings its identity into this space. So you have those different tensions that you have to deal with. So honestly, I don't know How are we going to address that?
Okay, and here's another question. I'm always fascinated by operations in universities in some African countries, the ease with which a university can close and close for an extended period. What is it that allows for this posture?
What do
The
you mean?
operational aspect of universities. But I guess first of all, do you accept the premise that, or the statement that there is this kind of ability to make these kinds of decisions that you close and close for extended periods? Universities in some African countries, that was what the statement said, that the ease in which they close or close for an extended period. What allows for that posture?
Close and in terms of operations, shut down operations. Is that what you're talking?
I think that's what is meant. Yes, I think that's what is meant. Is that your experience?
Look, I mean, there must be a reason why universities have to close. You know, maybe in other African countries, I'm not sure about other African countries. We have a set calendar that we follow. But of course, when there are protests, sometimes necessitate the closure of universities, because these protests are often very violent, as I pointed out. You know, so it's not something that you can just disrupt. You can just kind of willy-nilly disrupt an academic calendar. That does not happen. But the time that the circumstances necessitate the closure of universities. So especially during the Fee Must Fall and the Rhodes Must Fall movements, universities closed down in fact, all universities in the country were actually came to a complete halt, you know, because of protests. And because it was a question of how do we then protect the university infrastructure, and they had to basically send students out of. So to start with, if we're talking about operations, they're often forced by disruptions. You know,
right.
Student protests, and when student protests are happening, it gets to a point where the academic project has to be suspended for security reasons as well. You know, for staff safety, for student safety, and also the way of protecting infrastructure. And I don't know about other African universities.
The example that was given was the University of Lagos, which closed for months last year while staff were on strike. That's one of the disruptions that would have caused, you know, that prolonged closure. There's a question here about how your unit or the University of Pretoria is addressing generative AI. For example, do you have a policy? How are you maneuvering there?
We're still trying to understand it as most of the other universities. Well, the university came up with some guidelines. We call them guidelines on how to address generative AI. And in a sense, faculties are dealing with it differently based on those guidelines. But it's something that everybody is still trying to understand. But at the same time, we're all very, very paranoid about it. You know, we're so worried, particularly in our own context where it involves writing. And so, but my personal view is that we need to, in my view, we need to, is it such a bad thing? No, I don't think it is. I think what ChatGPT has done, in my view, is that it has it's forcing us to rethink the way we design our modules, the way we teach, and also the way we assess. And the most important thing is that at this stage, we need to be focusing on those high order thinking skills, rather than things that students can easily. So even if a student were to use ChatGPT for whatever reason, they should be able to look at what ChatGPT has produced and be able to sort of critique what is coming out of ChatGPT. So we need to be able to do that with or without a policy. Of course, there's a policy, there's a kind of guidelines, and we all obsess about it, we're all paranoid about it. We say, well, we need to take this thing very seriously. My view is that we we need to see it as an opportunity to sort of socialize it and get students to understand how they can use it as a learning tool. But of course, being very critical about it, and you cannot do that if you haven't trained your students to be able to critique the type of knowledge that they have access to. Because it can generate this thing. Yeah, that's true. But if you look at the way, I mean, we have asked ChatGPT to write essays for us, and the simple thing, one of the very few things that we picked up was the fact that even though we were writing about a South African context, they were basically, all the references were fake. They were fabricated. So you would try and look for the article, but the article is there. The journal does not exist. Even the authors do not exist, but they're South African names, So a student would not pick up something like that. They wouldn't. They would just pass it on. So instead of trying to criminalize it, that's what we've been doing, even with plagiarism. Instead of trying to criminalize it, what should we be doing? We say, well, this is an opportunity to start focusing on the things that we've been neglecting, which are the high order thinking skills. Because for me, I believe that once a student develops a critical mind, they can basically deal with any situation, So we need to start thinking about, and also the type of assessment that we're giving our students. We need to change the type of assessment that we give our students. We often ask them, now we talk the how and the what type of question. We need to be asking them the why type of questions more and more and more and more. Yes, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you doing that? I'm not saying that ChatGPT cannot answer that question, but again, we need to stop. For me, it's an opportunity to be more reflective in the way we design our curriculum, the way we teach, and the way we assess. But as I said, there's a policy, the guidelines on that, and people are applying it differently in different contexts.
I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I just wanted to comment on two things that you said. One that resonated with me, and maybe you could say a little bit more on it. You said that students were digitally active, but struggling with information overload. That relates a lot to the AI and to things like ChatGPT, that they don't have the cognitive competencies to do so. So is that one of the things that in terms of how do they engage with what is being produced by these AI tools? That's an opportunity then. Is that what you're saying for us now to fill that gap?
Yes, indeed. That's exactly what I'm saying. That look, access to information now is very easy, but it's basically what you do with the information, how you appreciate that information, what you do with the information. And students often, so if you see the way they write, they just pull information from different sources and put together and say, well, you select what you need from this information. But we need to change that, not make them to, first of all, to understand that not everything that you find online is valid, it's credible, it's reliable, So they need to be able to select, and you need to have a critical mind to be able to make that type of judgment. That no, even though I found this information, it's not really responding to the question, And this is what we see in our students. So you ask a student a question, they go online, they Google information, and the first thing that they see, they take and they put. They don't even reflect on the information. They don't even understand the information the same way that a lot of them would read it, a typical text. So what I'm saying that's what we need today. They are overloaded with information, which then calls for a very critical, kind of critical assessment of that information. You have to be selective. If you have a lot of information at your disposal, you have to be very selective as to what you use and what you. And my battery is about to die.
Okay.
Let me just
all right. Connect. Sure.
Let's do this quickly.
The other comment, there's another question in the chat, but my other comment
Yeah.
was really a comment about, you mentioned the fact that the pandemic really revealed the digital inequality. I guess maybe that was the case in many developing countries, but certainly
Yes.
in the Caribbean and in Jamaica, that was the same issue we had. Many students didn't have devices. We ended up with the library actually providing devices where students could rent devices. And I wonder, now that we're post-pandemic, how do we deal with that revelation that we had of this, severe inequality in terms of the students? If, we've kind of moved on past that. But I thought that was something that, people felt that the online really, it provided so many opportunities, but there were so many, the downside was also so great in terms of, wealth disproportionate, inequality. Okay, there is a question here that says, what changes in enrollment, if any, occurred at the University of Pretoria after COVID-19?
What do you mean changes in enrollment?
In terms of the numbers of students coming in or the categories of students coming in, did it affect the enrollment in terms of declining numbers or in terms of the different where people were coming from? How did it impact post-COVID?
Not necessarily. I mean, look, the thing about South Africa, particularly our university, there's certain universities that are very attractive. Your top universities are usually very attractive. So you have students moving from different provinces to come to our province to attend just to study at the University of Pretoria. So it didn't really, in a sense, affect enrollment that much. But in terms of international students, I think in my view, I don't deal with student enrollment, so I wouldn't really know that much. So I'm just guessing here in terms of international students. I think in a way it affected the number of international students coming to study in South Africa. But there are other reasons why. It's not just the pandemic. I mean, the issues of visas, getting visas to them. So what universities are doing are actually offering hybrid, in a very hybrid mode. University is becoming more and more hybrid now. We're now developing even postgraduate master's programs, that are completely virtual, which then means that students can stay in their home country and still do the master's program. So that's what's happening now. But as I said, I don't really deal with enrollment issues, but we didn't see from our department, from our unit, we didn't really see any major saying our numbers have increased. And of course, one of the reasons is because the government insists that student numbers need to increase every year because they're producing more and more students from high school. And those students need to be able to access the university. They need to go to the university. So every year they actually expect university enrollment to increase. So you have targets that you have to meet. And that's what's happening. So we see this disproportionate, so still high student numbers and less funding coming from the government in terms of subsidies.
Okay. I think I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. So I am going to move on to requesting that the vote of thanks be done. And for that, we're going to ask Ms. Terika Brown, one of our academic literacy instructors, to move that vote of thanks. Dr. Andrew. Okay. Brown?
Thank you, Dr. Dash. Good evening, everyone. As this inaugural language section and the guest lecture comes to an end, I'd like to thank all of those that contributed to the success we've had. On behalf of the language section, I'd like to express our sincere thanks to Dr. Pinete Angu, Associate Professor and Director of the Academic Literacy Unit at the University of Pretoria, South Africa. Thank you for sharing with us the South African experience as it relates to disruptions in academic literacies. And it was indeed eye-opening to realize how much similarities we have in terms of the disruptions you face. Thank you for sharing with us your thoughts and ideas that we can now ponder on as we move forward. I'd also like to express thanks to Her Excellency Mrs. Joan Thomas Edwards, High Commissioner for Jamaica in South Africa. Thank you for your kind words and greetings as you encourage us to carry on with this event. The language section would also like to extend our gratitude to our Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Professor Sylvia Cohenberg. Thank you for your greetings and your support of this event and the entire Language Week. We also would like to thank our department, the head of our department, Dr. Vivette Milson-White. Thank you for your leadership and for encouraging this initiative. We would also like to thank you for welcoming us with an apt overview of where we are coming from as a department and section as we continue to navigate our own disruptions. Thanks as well to Senior Instructor in the Language section, Ms. Ama Ababio, for that lovely rendition from Lorna Goodinson. Thank you to Mr. Norte Antoine, also Senior Instructor in the Language section, for your introduction of the guest speaker. The reach of this guest lecture would not have been possible without the technical team of Mrs. Susanna Campbell-Blagrove, Senior Administrative Assistant from the Jamaica Language Unit, the JLU, and Dr. Joseph Farquharson, Coordinator from the JLU. Thank you for facilitating us using the Broadcast Jamaican YouTube page to hold this session. I encourage everyone to revisit their YouTube channel and see some of the amazing work they've been doing for our Jamaican language, and especially in the context of the multilingual issues that were also mentioned by Dr. Angu, to see some work that might be useful for us too in our area of academic literacy. We would like to thank the administrative staff from our department who've assisted us throughout the week and also with this event. Mr. Donique Salmon, Mrs. Ava Mundell, Mrs. Yvette Munde White, and Ms. Tika Shimyue. Special thanks to Mrs. Tashika Johnson Staple, who has special responsibility for the language section. She has really gone above and beyond throughout this week to ensure that we had a successful execution of all our events. Thank you, Dr. Daesh, for spearheading this inaugural Language Week and for the time and effort you dedicated to making it a success. And finally, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for your questions and all your comments. And we are certainly looking forward to having you again next year as we continue to improve in our delivery and our understanding of this whole idea of academic literacy. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you from my side. I want to again say thank you for inviting me to be part of this wonderful event. And I think that this is the beginning of more conversations to follow. And we're hoping that we're going to formalize collaboration and work together, because I believe that there's a lot that we share with the kind of commonality, the kind of synergies. And also, there are also things that are very unique to the two contexts. So it provides an opportunity for us to collaborate. And so I'm looking forward to more conversation going forward. So thank you again for having me, and I hope that the things that I've shared with you, you probably find them useful, and we can always engage with them more, either virtually or via email. So thanks. And so it's 3:30. I'm not sure whether I'm actually going to sleep again because I have to be up